Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. This is the Sylvie character review. Brand new unit released to global. It's kind of a surprise given that it's November. I thought Thanksgiving was tomorrow, but apparently Easter is tomorrow instead. I knew she was coming at some point. I just did not think it would be in November. Now for the presentation today, the character overview, base and total stat analysis, a little bit about some of these other stats and metrics, the report card, which I grade each of the attributes individually, and then the class and job overview. Will I take a deep dive into her AI and the abilities? Definitely don't miss that. This is a very, very complex character that's going to take a lot of tinkering to make work right, but she's got a ton of application across a bunch of different metas and scenarios, so it's to your benefit to best understand how to optimize your different builds. Now, I will look at the TMR review and then my general thoughts, kind of encapsulating a lot about what we've covered, with finally touching briefly upon some Esper Synergies and some weapon optimization. Now, as a brand new light element unit to the game, they did give her the bunny-loving knight unique main job with the white mage and Bladesoul Subjobs. She equips swords, hats, cloths, and accessories with a move of 3, jump of 1 as a 100 cost unit. Now, from a resistance perspective, minus 10% to strike, which is not the end of the world. I'm not terribly afraid of that. The minus 5% to slash do need to be wary of, but that's not unrecoverable, particularly with the amount of slash resistance penetration that exists in the game currently anyways. But the rest of them, 15% to pierce is definitely nice, 10% to missile is nice, 5% to magic is a good enough starting spot. So overall, no real deficiencies from a resistance perspective. Now, she is a 97 faith unit. You're going to want to get her up there, so you should be mindful about what she can be afflicted by from an ailment perspective. 50% to blind, 50% to stop, and 10% to paralysis. Now, the blind one, I'm not terribly concerned about. As you'll see, she's innately not that accurate, so being blinded probably won't change a whole lot, but the stop and paralysis certainly are nice when it comes to ability disrupting ailments. Now, as we jump into the base stat analysis, from an HP perspective, definitely a little bit below the average, but it's not the biggest weakness in the world. She will recover a little bit and has many other things in her kit that add to her survivability, so that's only one part of the story. From a magic perspective, definitely very high from a base magic perspective. Now, we'll see some of that fall off once you get to the total kit and whatnot, but overall, this is really strong given what she can benefit from when it comes to magic scaling things. From an agility perspective, a little bit above average here, which is definitely in her favor that she ends up at this, I believe, 58 base agility. That will definitely scale well with the agility boosting things, and definitely a good thing to see when it comes to supports and keeping up with the turn order. From a dexterity perspective, absolutely skews on the lower end of things here, so that's going to affect her crit hit rate and her dexterity, as we'll see. Finally, with the luck being a little bit above average, actually. Now, she will come back down to earth once we incorporate everything, but this is a really good starting base luck overall for a character like this. Now, we reconcile those base stats to the total stats and what you get from the mastery abilities, the board nodes, the board stats. She does actually have some relative weaknesses kind of undercutting the strength of these base stats. Now, the magic is the most notorious one where they really gypped her for magic points on the board, but that's okay. It's not the end of the world. Agility, they kind of gave her some love with 8 agility, and the dexterity, they absolutely gypped her on. So where she ends up with the total stats is a little bit different than the base stats, but strong base stats overall. And if we're looking at them exactly, you can see 49 board stats for the magic stat is very, very low. 8 agility is actually on the higher end of the average that they typically hand out, and 26 dexterity is basically nothing compared to what they normally give out. So definitely taking her down a notch here in some of the board stats. Now we look at some of the other metrics here. Crit hit, she does end up very, very low, as you've seen from that dexterity stat. It's not unrecoverable, but you should not be looking at her as a critical hit unit. The crit avoid rate ends up being kind of in the middle here. Now that will obviously skew a little bit higher with luck scaling things if you're putting her in a pure evasion comp, but not really noteworthy here for crit avoid either. When we look at the accuracy, though, definitely an inaccurate character. She's definitely on the lower end of the spectrum here on this blue line, which is total innate accuracy. And once you start equipping passives and whatnot, she definitely falls behind the cast of characters where she has nothing to boost her accuracy within her kit whatsoever. From an evasion perspective, actually more than I thought that she would have gotten. She's kind of that C tier, right on the very bottom line of what you should start to expect for characters to evade once in a while. That being said, if you are putting her in a hyper evade comp and people are gearing to hit for Elena and Locke, obviously they're going to hit Sylvie just by the numbers. But it's there, but maybe not reliably. Now, as we segue into the report card here, effective HP, I am going with a C. She actually does end up with a decent amount of survivability. I am omitting tanks here in terms of the overall stats, so this is kind of comparing her both to supports and damage dealers by and large. From a physical perspective, C-, just a smidge down given that she has no innate defense and the minus 5% to slash, but magic HP definitely much, much higher given the potential speared values she can get up to in addition to a magic barrier in the kit. And just recapping some of that, 6 and 8 Spirit overall, 10 AoE resistance, which is from her Mastery ability. She does have Re-Raise and Shell on one of her abilities. Now, it is a lower priority AI, so you gotta play around with it a little bit. But she does also get 15 defense and Spirit on a passive, and possibly up to another 12, not even including the buffs. So overall, does mitigate that HP by having some other kinds of survivability. Now, the primary stat ends up at a B. Although the base magic is very high, the magic in totality isn't as high as some of the other supports, but there are ways to get around that. It's certainly not the end of the world, given that she has the upside of the high base magic. From an agility perspective, going a B+, if not even a little bit higher, to be honest. She gets 73 agility with her passive. That is a very, very fast. 76 is the highest in the game. Obviously, there's a difference there if you unequip the passive that gives her that. But overall, you cannot underrate the speediness in which you can potentially achieve, which is very, very good for her balance of support skills and offensive skills. Now, accuracy, going with a D here, no accuracy or ways to boost it. Evasion is a C, more evasion than I would have thought, but definitely C tier. Don't anticipate her dodging a lot of things. And the movement is a C, no extra move or jump capabilities within the kit. Now, from a passive perspective, I am going B+. Decent passives, one of them is exceptionally good. The other ones are good for offensive output and bulk and do have some upgrades in the future, which are nice, but overall, B+ is a pretty good spot for it. Counter abilities, I am going B+ here. There is a excellent variety of counters that all have their own time and place. None of them necessarily heads and tails better than the others. We'll get into those soon. And then the overall kit, I am going with an A. There's a lot of utility, a lot of different support, a lot of different builds you can go with here in terms of offensive capabilities and how you can attack your enemies and what you bring to the battlefield in terms of intangibles. So definitely an A for the overall kit. For a final grade of an A, I only reserve A- to A+ for what I consider to be potentially meta-defining characters that bring something unique in their kit to counter what is inherently strong at the time, and she definitely has a bunch of that up and down, in addition to application across a wide variety of other maps and metas as well. Niche characters certainly have their time and place, but characters that have more broad applicability, particularly when we start talking about mono element versus rainbow comps, which I do think she has some rainbow comp potential. This definitely adds some extra utility points here. That final grade of an A is definitely well deserved. Now, the passive abilities. Marion's Blessing is by far the best one here. 24% magic, 40% slash resistance penetration, 15 defense and spirit. I would have this on at all times. There's no reason not to. Now, for my second favorite, I do think there's a smidge of a toss-up, but I am partial to Bladesoul lore. I don't think you can understate that 12% agility. The 40 spirit penetration obviously is exceptionally good for her offensive output. That being said, if you do end up leaning on her more as a healer, there are some other options here where March of the Saints in a future white mage upgrade will get an extra 24% magic, so that will help some of her curative potential. And Bladesoul lore will also get a buff to crit rate, probably not all that impactful to the decision-making process, but it's nice to know. And then Mind-Body Unity is a little more niche for different kinds of survivability against different kinds of comps, but overall, all of these certainly have their time and place. Now we look at the counter abilities. Prayer of Protection is unique to her in that it's a 20% chance to proc. It's a 60 modifier curative ability to kind of this 2-range diamond AoE around her. It's not necessarily the most impactful healing, but being able to heal up some of the damage in between turns certainly lessens the burden on how often she'll have to heal. So this is a really good one. Regenerator, I think, is exceptionally good, not necessarily in its current state, but in the future, when we get those white mage buffs, not only will this have a 20% chance to give herself regen, but will increase her healing power by 20 for 3 turns. So again, different kind of healing. So it's a toss-up between which one is best and where. And then Preemptive Revenge isn't the worst one either. It's the highest chance to proc here. Increases damage as her own HP is lower, but it's a preemptive ability. So again, if you're going for more maybe that offensive output as opposed to the curative potential, definitely time and place for all of these. As we get into the main job here, the buffs in particular. So Bunny's Protection is the one that caught a lot of people's eyes in the initial news, where this is her Re-Raise and Shell ability. Now, very, very good, but it is on the lower end of the priority in terms of what she uses for turn order when you consider the next buff as well as the White Mage potential buffs as well as the TMR. Now, one thing that's interesting, this is not as conditional as I would have thought it would. The way this is worded in comparison with other abilities, it made it sound as though if you have Re-Raise on, you cannot have your shell dispelled. That's actually not the case, unless it's a bug. I did some testing today where I had Luartha remove the shell on Sylvie, despite the fact that she still had Re-Raise active. So it's not 100% conditional. We'll see if Gumi ends up fixing that. Now, Prayer of Resolute Oaths, this is an excellent teammate buff that increases their defense and spirit as well as their own for 25 for 3 turns, as well as their defense and spirit debuff resistance by 100%, so they cannot have those attributes broken. This is the kind of buff, though, that she will run around in circles to make sure everyone gets it, though, so this is where you got to be really smart with your AI if you're trying to maximize all the turn orders. Now, as we get into the offensive abilities, you can see here that skews more offensive than buffs. There's 4 to 2, so she does have a profile where she does want to attempt to do damage. Now, Cheerful Paladin Strike is a pretty basic attack, 121% modifier for a cheap 15 AP. I'll Protect Everyone is really one of the things that helps make her a meta-defining character, in that it is a dispel all buffs and dispel haste to target. It also has the benefit of dispelling her debuffs on herself, meaning things like magic percent down or defense break on herself if they didn't have the buff equipped. So a ton of utility in this ability. It is a magic scaling ability, though, and if you're looking at the spread of this, she is mostly slash oriented. This one is unique in that it is a magic attack, and if you're looking at the range and heights of these top 2 abilities are a single target, with the second 2 being some pretty nice AoEs. Clever Paladin Strike is another excellent ability here that it's a giant AoE re-raise dispel, also has the chance to inflict slow as well. And True Paladin Strike, this one is probably a little more touch and go depending upon your team, where it decreases the enemy's defense penetration of 30. Now, it doesn't decrease it by 30%, it's actually subtractive in nature. So if you have 40 defense penetration, you subtract 30 from that, so the enemy will have only 10 defense penetration. This one, again, is a little more niche in that Light, as a cast of characters, isn't always known for super high defense values. At least the Evasion Light is not. And you really have to pick and choose, because this shares a 200% modifier with I'll Protect Everyone. Now, again, they're different types, so magic versus slash, but if your main priority is maintaining the dispel, there's probably a time and place where you want True Paladin Strike off. But again, that's part of the IQ that has to go into how you're building this character and what you're seeing and what you're taking her against. Now we get into the sub job, the Bunny Loving Knight. This is actually a really good one as well. If you've noticed, on the main job, there are no curative abilities whatsoever. So she definitely is more of a support than a pure healer. Now, Healing Prayer is her equivalent of Curaga in potency, but it also gives her 40% magic, which will definitely help amplify the amount of healing, as well as the amount of damage she can do. So I do like this sub-job a fair amount. Now, Crippling Strike is a very good one from the perspective of 50 healing power down. That is certainly potent, but the range is so small, I don't know if I really love this ability. I don't want her that close to the enemies if I can help it, and I think the other abilities are probably better overall. But really good sub job. It's really a toss-up in how you want to build your profile between this and the White Mage sub job, where there is no Curaga on this. So when it comes to AoE heals, you're limited to Cura, which is only 120 modifier, definitely lower than that other healing ability we just saw. She does have Curada, which is the single target one, and the biggest thing here is the full life. So again, you're really trying to decide whether you want to prioritize some of the more active, larger impact healing, or whether you want to go more for the full life access. You certainly don't want her to go into heal bot mode and just spam Cura over and over and over again, but you also want to be smart with how you use Protect and Shell here as well when it comes to her as a support unit, and that's why it's so important to get her buff and turn order correctly, because Protect and Shell certainly can cause some headaches in terms of what she does to recast it, taking priority over other abilities. Now, in terms of the White Mage future buffs, she will eventually get the full life range extended from 3 squares to 4 squares, but the rest of the White Mage job buffs will not affect her. She does not have Curaga, Regen, or Holy, so none of those changes will affect this sub job. So really, time and place for how you want to use her. And finally, the Bladesoul sub job, and this is why I say you got to be really smart with things, because this is also an exceptionally good sub job. I want to focus real quickly on Slate Wiper here, which is another dispel ability. And if you're looking at this, you'll notice, although it's a lower modifier, it is a slash type attack as opposed to the magic type attack on the main job. So you technically have access to 2 different kinds of dispel, both via slash and magic. I love that. The second noteworthy thing here is Banishing Barrier, and this will get a buff in the future. This is a 3,500 HP magic barrier, but it will eventually be a 7,500 HP magic barrier, while also increasing slash attack res penetration by another 40. So with her passive, that's 80% penetration. That's a massive amount of potential damage output. So no, you do not want her to be a heal bot. You really want to balance what she can do from a curative potential versus an offensive potential. Now, Sword Song Formation also gets a buff here of the Spirit of 15, but if you'll notice, that kind of overlaps with her main buff of giving her teammates 25 defense and spirit. But again, Light is known for a lot of its slash-oriented units, so that slash attack 25 buff to teammates certainly could come into place. I would tend to think you'd have this buff turned off, though. Now, as we get to the limit break, this is an exceptionally good limit break, where not only is it a 50% general barrier for teammates in the AoE, yes, it can be broken, but that is a very strong barrier, but it's also the strongest curative potential in her kit at 310 as a modifier, while also giving her 5% AP auto restore. Now, although she is a magic-oriented unit, she does not start battles with full AP. She does get neutered a little bit. I don't know the exact percent yet, but I do know it's not full. So the fact that you can have this AP auto restore to help maintain her offensive output is extremely impactful. This is an exceptionally good limit break. Now, as we look at the mastery ability, this is where she gets the 10 AoE resistance, also gets 400 decrease in the non-attack skill activation time. So, for the full life, for the curative abilities, this is a very, very welcome cast time down of 400 that will make it so that the full life is only 3 ticks to cast and go off. Now, we look at the TMR. From an accessory perspective, this has a lot of great stats on it. 2 casts, definitely big thumbs up. It's an AoE magic buff of 40%, and it decreases the chance of her or the user being targeted of 6. Now, this is not brand new per se. The Ketone TMR, and I believe one of the other ones also has Hate down, but this is obviously super nice from a support perspective, where not even just on Sylvie, but really any support, getting that magic buff will help their curative potential, while also helping their survivability by decreasing how often they get targeted. And in conjunction with their vision card, which is 3 hate down, you could get as low as 9 hate down. And again, in a current game where there's not as much tank play, so not as much, hate generation per se, being able to move yourself to the bottom of the hate priority is extremely powerful for your survivability. Now, my general thoughts overall, definitely more support than healer, as we've seen. The dispel buffs and haste, the teammate defense and spirit buffs, the slow and dispel auto revive, the decreased defense penetration of 30 to enemies, protect shell full life on the sub job. That's way more support oriented than curative oriented. Now, you can do both, but you just have to be smart, and that you're able to still weave in some offensive potential in there as well. No healing on the Mage job, only on the sub jobs, and White Mage does not have Curaga. Definitely keep that in mind. Excellent overall survivability by a variety of different means. The 10 AoE resistance, tons of defense and spirit on the passives and buffs, re-raise, dispel debuffs on herself, which certainly can help her survivability, and the -3 hate on the vision card and potentially the TMR. And then finally, excellent potential magic bulk given the spirit-based passives and the Bladesoul barrier. Now, when we look at the Esper Synergies, this actually could go far more in depth than what I'm about to do, but again, as you've seen, there's multiple different kinds of builds you can go for here in terms of prioritizing healing versus prioritizing dealing damage, and if so, is it magic damage, is it slash damage? So the nodes to really focus are primarily magic percent up, that's for sure, but then the other ones you can go for a variety of 4 different modifiers. Light attack and human killer will obviously apply to everything in her kit for PvP, but slash attack and magic attack certainly have their time and place as well. And then finally, if you want to go for element resistance or slash resistance as well to kind of bulk her up in that different sort of way. When you look at what these nodes are, there's a ton of Espers that do it. So just naming a couple that I like that I'm going to reso first. Bahamut is de facto the #1 by far. 25% magic, the human killer. I do think White Dragon from a bulking perspective is interesting, where you get 25% magic and slash and pierce resistance. Typhon is probably my second favorite one though, with the 20% magic. You also get slash attack as well as accuracy. And then finally, Bloody Moon is another really good one here. 15% magic. You also get some extra spirit, accuracy, and missile resistance depending upon what kind of teams you're seeing. There's obviously way more than just this. Diabolos has slash resistance and magic percent up. There's a few light espers that have light attack and missile resistance or dark resistance. Heck, depending upon the resistances, Odin and Chaos Odin wouldn't be the worst choices either if you're going for those super high agility and human killer modifiers, as well as what they bring to the board for resistance nodes. A lot of different ways you can go. So I'll stop there, but at least some easy recommendations. And then the weapon optimization, there are some really other great magic oriented weapons, but what this does for Sylvie in terms of what you get for the bingo board is by far the best weapon for her, if not even just for the 15 healing power and the 30% magic, not having to worry about equipping the Galmia cloak or being able to exceed the magic percent that you would get from a Trust Stone passive. So this is by far the best weapon for it. The 15 accuracy certainly helps as well. There's probably some others that work in other builds for different kinds of comps, but that's getting way too niche to really dive into. This is 95% of the time the best sword for her. And that's the Sylvie review. This is obviously a very complex character. Now, that's not to say that she's hard to use. I think Her AI is very smart and she's impactful enough that you're going to get value no matter what. It's really just a question of how much value can you get out of her. I think she absolutely deserves the A grade. She's most definitely warranted as a 100 cost unit. I think she's a very welcome addition to the light cast. I know a lot of people didn't think that element needed help, but when you look at the JP timeline of things, light is getting absolutely nothing in the future as of right now. Hope and his vision card was the last things that light got on the JP side of things. And so when you talk about the balance between the dark element and the light element, dark definitely has the edge at the moment. This certainly helps to kind of bring things back to even. And not even talking about elements, as we transition away from mono element comps with the new vision cards that are coming out that are class oriented, Sylvie definitely has some extra upside here, particularly with her vision card when it comes to rainbow comps. So I just generally like her addition to the game for what she brings. I think people are going to get really creative with what she ends up doing for them. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching, everybody. I can't wait to do some extra videos on her to kind of dive deeper into some of these attributes and builds and the vision card itself. But until then, I'll talk to y'all soon.